So, joining us today on Socratic Spotlight is Diego Gunter. He is a junior at the Socratic Experience this year. Diego is interested in entrepreneurship, music. He has a really cool story about an internship that he did last year and got credit for with us. So, I just want to start by asking Diego, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to the Socratic Experience and previous schools you had been to, how it compares to the Socratic Experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my kind of academic story is very, very long. So, I didn't actually end up going to the same school for more than 1 year at a time until my third grade year. And then from third grade, I went to the same school till sixth grade, and then I switched again, then I switched again, and we were always moving. I've moved a ton of times in my life. But when we ended up the year before I started going to TSE, I was going to a public school down here where I live in Florida with about 7,000 kids in it. And it was my first day. I had just moved. I didn't know anything about anybody. And I just went to the school that was in my district because that was kind of all there was to work with. I didn't have any bearing at all. And by lunch, I decided that I didn't want to go there anymore. There was this plan that I had with my parents that day to have a first day lunch. I was very nervous. It was pretty intimidating to be at a school that large. Even though I had been to public schools before, it was like six times the student count, and the hallways were packed, and like just the stuff I was seeing was very, like it really got to me. It was very intimidating. And so the plan was that I would have lunch with my parents. But the school was so uh, strict about people leaving and the security, and that they were worried about different acts of violence in different ways, but you couldn't even leave and then come back because they were so worried that kids would have like leave to go get something and then come back, and that would jeopardize the safety of all the other students. And so, due to that, I called my parents, and we had heard about TSE, I think, through some online ads my dad had, and he had talked to me about it. And I said, and I was very into sports at the time. So I said, I'm going to go try the sports thing. I'm going to go try high school. And then by lunch, I realized, this just isn't what learning about is about. Actually, there's a specific story I have in one of the auto shop classes that I was very excited to take. It was one of my electives, and of actually two electives. And the other one was some history class that I was very not excited about. But he actually straight up asked the class one question. It was all guys. It was packed. There was like 40 kids in a 30-kid classroom. And he asked everybody, and he said, who here is excited to learn? And I sheepishly kind of half raised my hand, like in the back corner, but nobody else raised their hand. And I was sitting there for the next hour that class was, where nothing happened, and he just talked. But I was sitting there and I was thinking, what really is the point that I want to get out of my academic experience? And at that point, I think my cumulative GPA was 1.75, because I was never motivated to do anything, but I could do it. So I would do the bare minimum just to skate by. Um, and at that point, I was really thinking, okay, what are these kids going to get out of it? What am I going to get out of it? What is the whole public education system as a whole in the U.S. going to get out of their learning experience? And I said, I don't think that this is it. I want to go find something else. And so I think that same night, I had my interview with Michael, and from there, the rest is history.
So, what would you say to parents who are kind of apprehensive? The public school system is the only thing that they kind of know. I can certainly say that probably about my parents growing up. I knew that public school didn't work very well for me, but everyone goes to public school, and it's the only thing a lot of people know. And your parents were very receptive to an alternative. What would you say to parents or even students, like teenagers your age, who are they know that it's not really working well for them, but they're afraid to kind of make the transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Change is scary. Change is very scary. I've grown up and I've gone everywhere. Like and as soon as I feel like I've found a foundation, I've immediately had to leave multiple times. And so what I think, especially when I had to leave my hometown of in Colorado Springs, going to that school for a long time. I remember feeling how scary it was and how hard it was to leave, but still knowing that I wasn't happy and I wasn't satisfied and I wanted change as it was there. Um, I think that there are two things that I realized through kind of the hardship of change and going to TSE, and like kind of focusing and developing on becoming the best person I could be, and the smartest and the most capable, is that the happiness in my life comes down to my quality of relationships. and my meaning comes down to my sense of purpose and the problems that I face every day. I think that a lot of people will see, okay, in public school, we aren't getting this quality of relationships. We aren't seeing people that we're happy being around. We aren't really facing problems that we think are worth our time. I think that public school in many ways is a daycare, and I think that most of the work that you're going to get is busy work, and so it's really nothing but stress. Like especially in AP classes, I think that like you'll see the people who are taking on more and the people who are going further and farther in their curriculum as other students aren't actually facing necessarily more difficult work or work that they're getting more information from. It's just that there's a lot more of it, and that will kind of set them apart to colleges in that way. I think with TSE, the difference is that there's like maybe one half of the work time, but the work that you're doing will stimulate all of your brain at once, and you'll think about everything in a new perspective every day. And you'll have to think about it in different ways, and your synapses will fire kind of this way, and you'll have to think about it from somebody else's perspective and your perspective. And that is what taught me to think in that way, because going back to that story where you're sitting there and it's like, why, what am I trying to get out of learning? I think that that is the only way. It's just growth, it's just expansion and becoming who you want to be. And that gave me direction academically, which I did not have. And so now I have that very much, and I'm very passionate, I'm very motivated, and I'm very, very much more happy than I was in a public school. And so I think that the apprehension is good, but I think that it's good to be quizzical, because that will put you in a good position instead of just jumping into something. But I think that TSC is definitely um, worth it more than a public school might be. Another thing worth mentioning is that if you wanted to still take an AP class just for the college's sake, because that's the traditional route, you can absolutely still do that. Sports, extracurriculars, AP classes, college classes, all of that is still very much attainable through TSE. Actually, it's free in most cases.
When you talk about TSE being purposeful and really cultivating like your interests and kind of your path, what is it about the school that does that? Is it the mentors, the guides? Is it the structure of the classes, the way that they're set up in the Socratic method, or is it kind of all of the above?
Absolutely. I think that it is all of the above, but for me, the biggest difference is the mentorship program. I think that that is a huge part of what sets apart TSC for me, especially because my mentor is Michael, who's probably the most like visionary person I'll ever have to learn from in my entire life. But I mean, the internship is an example. I had talked a lot about the experience that I had before coming into TSE and the very little things. And I said, I'm interested in finance. I'm interested in business. I talked about my professional career up until then. And like, these are the things that I found success with and like all this. And he immediately would have every day, every time we'd have a meeting, we'd have a meeting. I think it was Tuesday nights every week. He would have something for me to search like for the next whole day or the whole week and come back to him and say, wow, this is really interesting. This is really cool. And then eventually for Prospera, he talked about, have you heard of like urban economics? Have you heard of urban development and like private urbanism? And I was like, well, these are all really cool words. Like, I don't know what they mean. And then I looked into it and he was like, yeah, I'm giving a talk, you should come. And that, I think it's one thing to sit in a classroom and talk about these really cool ideas. And I think even that would set apart a lot of teachers in a lot of ways. But I think that he was like, yes, and this is a bona fide, verifiable opportunity that I can give you as a kid, as somebody who isn't going to get it from anywhere else, and seeing me as somebody to get an opportunity. And then going there and being able to take advantage of that opportunity and having something that will set me apart for the rest of my life, just because I think that it's the opportunity that your effort, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, your effort to success. And that is what the mentorship program is. It's wherever you want to go. As long as you want to go there, you can end up where you need to be.
Okay, so tell us about Prospera. Tell us about, you mentioned that Michael told you about it, but tell us about, just give us some background on what it is, where it is, and then I want to hear all about the internship and how you approached the people at Prospera for the internship.
Absolutely. So that is a very exciting. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. That's my favorite question. And so I get to talk about it. Prospera is ZE, which in Spanish translates to Zone for Economic Development. And what a zone for economic development is, basically Honduras is a very, very challenged country, very, very impoverished country. And they are on the mainland is where they have Tegucigalpa, which is their capital, and they have their biggest city, San Pedro Sula, which is their like New York City. And so they are San Pedro is basically controlled by gangs, and Tegucigalpa is always under political warfare. And so with that, it cripples the country pretty much. Like there's no business opportunities, there's no like educational opportunities, there's impoverishment everywhere, like there's so many issues. But there's an island off the coast, and they call it the Islands of the Bay, and it's called Rotan. And on Rotan, they had an idea to sell a municipality to a business, and the business that owns the municipality is allowed to implement its own laws and legislation. And what that means, what Prospera did with that, is that they bought that, and then their philosophy is then that the contributors, the economic contributors within the zone, were allowed to dictate the whole legislative control for the best interest of their own businesses, which I think is a very interesting idea. But that's what Prospera is. There are other economic zones in the world, but Prospera is by far the one that's furthest along. And even now, like since I've been there, they've had huge development and huge growth. In a lot of ways, they made a lot of strides forward, and what they're doing down there. So that's kind of the idea, is that they have entrepreneurs and creative business people that come in, start their own businesses, and then operate. And Prospera is like platform for prosperity, is how it translates. And so it's basically all it is Prospera just wants to see a better economic future, specifically for Honduras and the world at large. And so when I went there, I was going for their EdTech Summit, which was like a conference talking about educational technology, and that's why Michael was going to speak there. Um, and so when I went there, I met a ton of people who I still talk to, and I'm very motivated by, and have had different experiences and a lot of things. But specifically, I met somebody named Max Medina, who is the head architect for Prospera. And it kind of wasn't like he was only at Prospera, and the conference was going other places and like to the hotel. But in the real estate division, I kind of like was off the broken path, and I talked to them more. We were given opportunity to talk to them, but I like had reached out to speak to them more, and I went twice. So the first time I established the relationship, and we did really well. But the second time, I proposed to him at a cocktail party. Basically, like we were all eating refreshments after a presentation, and I said, you know, I have a ton of experience in these different areas. I have had this huge, and actually, right before I left, I asked Michael if I could do an accredited internship, just because I wanted to make sure. But I said I have a ton of experience, and I've seen that your problems that you've mentioned that you've had, I can solve, and I want to take that on for my next semester with school. And I know it'd be a lot, but I think that you would really enjoy that. And just that I was very motivated by it. Um, he needed the help, and he's a very, very kind person. And we had a really good relationship. And so he was like, "All right, sounds good." And so when I got back home to Florida, I started working digitally, and yeah, he was very good. He became my teacher in a lot of ways, like my guide. Just as TSE, he assigned a lot of work and had me think in a lot of different ways, even philosophical. Philosophical architecture is not really something I thought about originally, but it was something that he really had me he think to. And another way of thinking with your hand, as opposed to thinking and like building architectural skills, to drawing, to digital fabrication, to being able to just look at a space, and then as he does, which is the coolest thing to watch. He'll look at a space, and he'll have a little notebook, and then he'll just sketch something, and it'll be like perfect 1-to-1 ratio of what he wants. Um, and it was amazing. But I went down there. I think it was 2 or 3 times. I think I went an extra couple times after that. For just 2 times, just to hang out and do work in person for a couple conferences with the college. But I mean, these are the kindest people in the world. They took me in. They helped me. They got to know me as a person, as opposed to just a employee. And then after I worked with Prospera, I also started doing work with Lava, which is also affiliated to Prospera, but they are doing projects like the line in Saudi Arabia. And I'm not sure if maybe you're familiar with, yeah, but a lot of people might not be as familiar with it. But I got to work on projects like that. and he kind of surprised me with that project a little bit. And he was like, "You get to work on this now," and absolutely blew my mind. So I was really able to find success that I did at a huge level. And then after the internship was over, we kind of talked about the future. And then he was like, okay, at this point, you've done really well, but I think that you need to go to college and then develop your architectural skills that way. And then when you come back from college, you can absolutely expand and into the US and all these kinds of things. And so it went really, really well. But without TSE, I mean, I would have been that same kid in that public school, whether it be in Colorado, whether it be Florida, kind of struggling with the question of like, do I want to learn? Like, what is it to personal growth to me? And it was like then learning is something that you have to do consciously. It's like, oh, I don't want to learn. I don't want to take on this information. I don't want to beat my head against this because that's what it is. But with TSE and with the whole path that I've gone on since then, it's like learning is passive. It's like I'm always learning. I'm always in a good environment with good people and expanding my brain in so many different ways. So I think that you in public school you might be surprised where it could take you. I think just the same, but I think TSE it's almost guaranteed that you'll be surprised where you'll end up and that you'll be very happy with the result.
I think that in public school, like for kids or now adults who have gone through public school their whole lives, the implication is kind of just something that knowledge is something that the teacher provides you, you know, and it's very top down. The teacher talks at you all day. You memorize it. How is the Socratic method, the structure of our courses at the Socratic Experience different from that? And you've touched on it a little bit as far as like responsibility for your own learning versus something else that somebody gives you. Of course, you need mentor, like good mentor figures, but ultimately you've taken a lot of responsibility for your learning. And I just think that that's something that they don't really impress upon kids in the public school system.
Absolutely. I think especially COVID as an example, you'll see like parents worried about the responsibility that their kids are taking on for learning because the kids aren't taking on the responsibility. Parents, in most cases, will either take on the responsibility of not making the kid do it or making the kid do it, and both are not are good and functional. And so I think I actually want to use last year I had Luis as my humanities teacher. I want to use him as an example. I love Luis to death. But the way that he kind of changed teaching for me, and it's a good transition from the auto shop teacher to Luis because they're kind of like two sides. They're polar opposites, almost exactly. To where he will focus on, he'll show things like he's very big on paintings too. So we'll usually open up the class with like paintings or something like a piece of art from the past. And he would talk about it a lot of ways. And the questions that he would ask were very different because they're not designed to have an answer. They're designed to make you think, which is still the answer, I think, it's interesting. But he wasn't looking for once like, and it was actually kind of funny because he would be frustrated, not frustrated. It would be an interesting challenge that I would usually know a lot of the paintings names and he wouldn't show us the names. He'd be like, what's happening here? What do you think is the artist is kind of trying to convey in this instance? And so I'd be like, oh, that's the Socrates talking to his like disciples, and he would be like, well, yeah, but what's happening, and what kind of, and that would happen a couple times, and so it'd be funny. But he would give us those kinds of things just to be able to take in information and kind of deduce and develop our autodidactic skills to create those pathways in our brain, those immediate tools to where our reflex is to take in information and look at it and develop our IQ and then glean what we can and understand something at a high level instead of knowing it before or instead of having it kind of thrust down upon us and like these are the dates, these are the things you memorize and just regurgitating information. You're creating and then digesting and developing. And that was a very different experience for me, especially in things like music, where you would think I think that music I always thought of as like, oh, this music is happy. This makes music makes you feel good. Oh, this music is sad. It makes me feel sad. But then you can look at maybe one of the more advanced artists is kind of trying to convey this pathway or this emotion or this up and down or this story instead of just a general tone. And so it was almost like seeing more color, tasting more flavors, and the general way that I was looking at the world started to change, and that helped in so many different things. Um, And I think that it really develops a maturity and it develops a palate for the future to be able to talk about things and the ability to kind of slow down and work through things. And so that was the difference between having this crazy like high octane motivation to go pursue all these different things, like all these different opportunities that I was getting through TSE, but also the ability to slow down and kind of look at it and digest it and help. And I think that that was a huge difference that Louise made for me. That the teachers, like, I was learning how to learn. I was learning how to learning how to learn is a good way to say it. Just the ability to take in information instead of like take in information instead of like swallow information or be force fed. It's a bit of a violent example, but that's definitely how it felt.
Force fed is a good analogy. What classes are you taking this year, and what are you enjoying so far?
Yeah, so this year my focus is to get into that college and to kind of get out on my own. I've always been pretty independent in my own personal life with my family, but this year has kind of been like, okay, now it's time to figure it out for myself. Um, so this year I'm taking humanities and STEM, and those are my two big ones with Bert Albert Loan and then Yao Mateus. And those are it's humanities, but it's a focus on American history all the way from the time we landed to the present, or I guess the time Columbus landed to the present, and then creative entrepreneurship. Which is very exciting. I love that STEM class. I've always loved my STEM classes too. Data science last year, and then just humanities last year as well. Focused on like Enlightenment and Renaissance. But this year I didn't take electives on Wednesdays because I needed the time to transition into college and that kind of thing. But next semester I'm doing dual enrollment at FAU, and that's in South Florida. But I want to stay until I'm 19 in TSE because that's the last year that you can stay, and I want to cling on to it for as long as I can. Um, but Bert, as a teacher, is probably the most. He teaches at the University of Guatemala full time, and he has for a while. But I think that he's the most. He prepares us the best for I think the academic future that we will face versus the academic current present that we get to have with TSE. I wish that it could be more like TSE everywhere, but Bert is awesome because he's able to kind of balance like the college norm with the TSE and transition a lot of the older kids out. And I think that that's why every older kid has him for their humanities. Creative entrepreneurship is very exciting because Yao has spent his professional career focusing on teaching kids creative entrepreneurship in Portugal, which is a country that is very good for creative entrepreneurship, and like moving there and developing your business and getting a platform the same way that like Prospera's philosophy is. I love my classes and every day I'm motivated to. Another thing is that my schedule is insane. And without TSE, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I have to miss every Tuesday and I'm always driving because I am commuting to South Florida and North Florida and back and back and back. But no, my classes, I'm over the moon about my classes and my classmates. Like everything is really well. The conversations that we have, seminar will forever be the standard. It always every day I'm challenged and excited and happy.
You're very well spoken for your age, and honestly, probably better, more well spoken than a lot of adults. There's been kind of this epidemic of social anxiety. I hear it more and more over the phone from parents that I think, especially COVID and social media, have exacerbated a lot. But even when I was growing up, I don't think I could say for myself and my peers that public school kids were very well spoken or articulate. They still tend to be very timid sometimes because they're not in an environment where they have a lot of autonomy. So I know you have gone to a lot of different kind of schools. Did you develop some of this confidence at TSE, or was it there prior to TSE?
You know, I was always pretty contrarian. I was always pretty loud. Like I speak quietly, but I say loud words. Um, I think that the stereotype for a middle schooler or a high schooler will always be the kind of hoodie, like in the back of the classroom, like dead eyes perspective, like that will always be the image,
I
or
think
at least
that's
it
how
has
most
been.
of us felt going through middle school. It was just an awful experience for everyone. And adults say this, you couldn't pay me to go back to
Absolutely.
middle school. And it's like, okay, well, why are you making your kids go to public middle school?
Absolutely. Even my own family, who I'm very close with my family back in Colorado and like all over the world. I'll talk to them like the ones of them going through middle school. It'll be like, yeah, it'll be like, wow, this is really awful. And I'll be like, yep, it's about as bad as it gets. Um, but I think that the anxiety with TSE is interesting because you can always turn your camera off. I mean, it's right there. You just hit the button, you hit mute, you hit your camera off, and that's it. They'll put you in the waiting room eventually, but you can't, and very few people do. It's a very rare occasion. And when people do, you can know, oh, it's not because they're like socially anxious, it's because they have something going on. Like maybe their cat is, I don't know. It's usually something to do with animals. Um, whatever. But I think that TSE is much better than public school for the social anxiety aspect, if that is something that people face with just in their own lives. I think that everybody struggles with social anxiety, but some people might struggle with it on like a day-to-day basis versus like the first day of school or big event that's like, oh, I'm nervous about this thing. And so you'll get that with TSE the same way you will with any new experience. But I think that as soon as most kids get through orientation week, as soon as most kids get through their first breakout room, or their first social connection, their first teacher, and their first, like all those firsts, I think once you get through that, the confidence will start to get there because you'll start to be motivated about things. And you'll start to say, defend your ideas and develop ideas and say, well, it might be this way. And you feel so strongly, emphatically about your own points and your own ideas because they are for the very first time, or that's at least my experience, for the very first time strong. And like I even to this day, I think another thing is that you will realize the power of argument. You realize the power of seminar and conversation is that I try to like critique other ideas and they the same to me because that is how we develop the kind of tried and true forge of conversation and how we really develop our tools and our swords to fight each other in conversation, and that's how we develop the strongest versions of each other. And so the social anxiety will hopefully fade away more and more as you develop. I know it has for me. In my first days, I was also terrified. I didn't have my camera on the first day in orientation week. I haven't turned my camera off probably for I don't know, like almost 2 years now. Um, and so you'll really start to, at least in my own experience, you'll start to develop a difference. But I think in the difference with social anxiety in high school and middle school is that you won't see if like fifth and fourth graders, it'll like kindergartners as an example, like the difference between a kindergarten and a 12th grader. Like the kindergarten isn't going to care about anything. But slowly, over like if you saw a kindergartner and then the same 12th grader, you'd be like, "Whoa, what happened to you?" Like you must have really gone through some stuff. I think that it's earned at middle school, and it's kind of earned through there because that's when it starts to get brutal. That's when it starts to have those stories where it's like, oh man, that is awful, and you just won't get that at TSD at all. You will never get that, and so the social anxiety won't be earned. But if you have social anxiety issues on your own, it also is very accommodating, and there's nothing to worry about.
Do you ever get pushback from family members or just people in the community being in an alternative school or an alternative form of education? I know you've been homeschooled in the past and you've gone to a lot of alternative schools, but yeah, do you ever experience that?
Yeah, but if you're getting pushback, you're doing something right. And really, the one like I don't get it from my immediate family. I don't get it from friends. I don't get it from like there's kind of this like the in-law stereotype or like the old-fashioned grandparents or something. I actually do have this one story. When I was doing my architecture internship in Honduras, actually from about November till June of this year, I wasn't in the same place for more than 2 weeks at a time, and I was traveling the whole world. I went back to Colorado for a period of time. One of my my Colorado family's friends, like a family friend, kind of had asked me about everything. And they were like, okay, what's the name? And so I was like, oh, the Socratic Experience. And then she was like, oh, well, that doesn't sound real. Like, I just didn't know what I was gonna. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I kind of tried to hold my tongue and like, but I was like, oh, what are you up to? Like, I'm doing these kind. What are your kids up to? like how is middle school going for them or something like that. So I think that it is alternative, but the vindication that I feel, or like the truth is that I think that regardless of what happens outside, what happens inside, like the perspective of the people around you won't really matter. And I think if enough people came in and actually saw your day to day, then they would also be changed. But if that isn't the case, as long as you understand what's happening inside of the power, I don't really, think it matters. It does frustrate me very much to see people who are so like resistant to change and people who'll put the brakes on something like the red tape that you'll face in your academic experience. But I think that the pushback is very easily changed. You can see how much good TSE is doing. You can see all the stories. You can see all the people. You can see all the community, and that's all that is needed to combat it.
Do you feel that the environment cultivates community very well, even though it's online?
Some of my very closest friends that I have to this day, I've met through TSE. I think that even community itself, like community is community because there's the focus on community. There's a focus to bring that. There's also the trips that they do. I was gonna go to Greece this year, but personally, like the Greece trip happened, but I faced some travel issues with me and my sister. But I know that that trip went very well. And I think they're also doing Kilimanjaro. I think they're doing like a couple camping trips. I know that if people live in your state, you can organize like little school sanctioned events that way. And there's different ways to do things. The clubs are a huge one. That's kind of like your the architecture internship of your school or like your own personal project that you could take on immediately. Like that is something you could do very, very fast. I think that really it's more intentional. You have to be more intentional about creating your own community and your own social life. But as long as you're intentional, it's really everything that it can be.
Yeah, I think intentional is probably a good way to put it. And it also helps that you're surrounded by peers that have common interests to you and are also very purposeful, or at least thinking about how to live purposely, versus at the public school, pretty much the only thing that you have in common with them is you're the same age or close in age and you live in close geographic proximity, but otherwise you don't necessarily have that much in common with them.
Absolutely.
We touched on it a little bit ago, but I should have asked more. So, the being in the accredited high school program, tell us a little bit about what you're able to do with that as far as what the program has covered cost wise and giving you credit for your internship, stuff like that.
I think that the biggest thing that, well, like everybody's personal goals are different, you know? So I think that the benefit that the accredited program offers you is the really all of the programs in their different way. It's the focus on what it offers you outside of school or like at the end, because unfortunately it does end for everybody. I think that the accredited program for me is about college. Um, and it's specifically at this point FAU and that whole program. But I think that the cost benefit for me is that um, I don't think that I've ever spent, or I don't think any money has ever been spent on me better than it has at TSE. I think that the amount of product that I've gotten, the amount of what the desired purpose of spending all that money is, I think I've gotten more out of that than I have out of really anything else. Like I played a lot of sports growing up. There's a lot of money spent on sports. I don't think I got as much out of sports as I did with this. I think that there's been a lot of like with um, there's different ways to look at it with like basic necessities like a car or food or whatever, and I need those things. But I think that if I could take all of the money from other places, like with music or with whatever, I think that if I had to be like, okay, you can only have one, it would definitely be TSE. Because I've learned more than just how to do homework or just how to learn about these classes. I've learned how to think and how to act and how to see. And for me, that's like learning how to fly. And I know I just wouldn't have gotten that anywhere else.
Is there anything else that you think people should know as far as how TSE has helped you cultivate your interests or your path?
I think the biggest thing is that they realize what I needed versus I was like, oh, well, I kind of had this abstract idea where I was like, oh, these are fields that I've had success in, or this is something that I'm interested in. And I think this is a really cool idea. And then they were Michael was immediately able to be like, oh, well, here's this thing. Oh, well, here's another opportunity. Oh, here's like, oh, okay, let's just transition to this, and this will help you in this way because I know you and I know the world, and I'm helping you into the world. And so here's a little spoonful. Like here's something to chew on, and then eventually you can go that way. And I needed that. I was like, oh, here's Prospera. Oh, here's the internship. Here's the summer program. Here's the math. Like for me, math, I'm just trying to do all of the math that I possibly can for my, like I'm independent study now, and it's like, oh, okay, you don't need to be in geometry class. You can just do it on your own time and do all of the work. And it was really that ability to know what I needed and then give it to me when I didn't know what I needed.
How was the college admissions counseling, and how did you decide on FAU, and what are you studying, or what are you planning on studying?
For dual enrollment, it's actually really easy. You just need to submit it and have a few basic requirements met. I think you need to take the ACT, you need to take the SAT, and have above a 3.0 cumulative GPA. But then as long as you do that, it's free and you're good to go. For me, the thing that I'm still trying to figure out with FAU is the housing. The reason I want to go to FAU is because when we moved down here, originally when I started going to TSE, I was in West Palm Beach. And then by the time that I was through with going to Prospera for a couple times, then we had moved down to Fort Lauderdale, and then we were there for a very long time. I was traveling all the time, but we were there for a very long time. I established a foundation there with my own like personal life and friends and that kind of thing, like I never have anywhere else in the world. And so FAU is good because it's down there, and I have things going on with music. I have things going on with like education and that kind of thing. Where and especially moving out on my own, I think that it's important to go to there. But FAU, I think it's either the first or the second. There's FIU, which is like south more southern, and they Florida International University, and they have a real estate law program that's the best in the state, and then they have a commercial real estate brokerage program that's either the first or the second in the state, but they're two south. And then FAU also has that same commercial real estate brokerage MBA, but I'm not sure if it's the first or the second. So FAU just makes sense for me because a ton of people I know are going to FAU too. Um, and it's just a really good school in the state for the exact field that I'm looking into, and it is around. And college is just something I'm very excited about. I think it'll be nice to everybody. I think every high schooler at some level or another has thought about college, and most of them want to go. Um, but with the admissions process with Michael, I mean, I think that he can take your transcript and he can put whatever needs to be done, like hit all of the points and all the boxes, and create something out of nothing, really well. He's almost like some kind of florist taking all of these random assorted plants and making something beautiful and giving it to the colleges and getting you accepted. I think that the biggest challenge that I'll face isn't dual enrollment, but early admission. And I haven't done early admission yet. I'm really hoping that I can. But if anybody in the entire world is going to get me in there, it's definitely going to be TSE.
When you say that you compared it to a forest, like putting flowers together, do you mean the independent study courses? Because we're very flexible as far as offering independent study courses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think he's just taking everything that you have, really, and kind of pushing it together in this beautiful variety. I think that he's taking my independent study. I think that he's taking the pre-existing stuff that I have before TSE. I think he's taking my best attributes and making them look as beautiful as they can.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for your time, Diego. I really wish you the best of luck in all your ventures. This is going to make for an incredible interview. You're really well spoken, and it was a lot of fun.